Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study. Today is November 4th, 2017, and we are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And this morning, our moderator is Mike from New York. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. The reading is from Miscellaneous Writings by Mary Baker Eddy. In the spiritual genesis of creation, all law was vested in the lawgiver, who was a law to himself. In divine science, God is one and all, and governing himself, he governs the universe. This is the law of creation. By defenses of God, saveth the upright in heart, and that infinite mind governs all things. The lawgiver was the only law of creation. Freedom reigned and was the heritage of man, but this freedom was the moral power of good, not of evil. It was divine science, in which God is supreme and the only law of being. In this eternal harmony of science, man is not fallen. He is governed in the same rhythm that the Scriptures describes when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you.
We could end on that.
Yeah, right.
It's sweet.
Uh-huh.
Any more comments on that, or did that sum it up?
Well, I do like the thought of governed in the same rhythm that the Scriptures describe when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. When you're in that divine mind, it is a feeling of being in rhythm. You're in rhythm with God. It's a wonderful sense, and it's one that you should feel. You know, the thought when you're out of rhythm, feel like everything's going awry. But when you're in rhythm with God, it's just like riding a horse, and you're in that rhythm, moving, not too fast, not too slow, but just in God's timing.
And this also gives us a clue as to what freedom really is, doesn't it? When the lawgiver was the only law of creation, when we don't think of ourselves as a creator of anything, or anybody else as a creator of anything, when we know that God is the only creator of anything, then we start to have a lot of freedom. So there's no false sense of responsibility put on anybody.
It's a beautiful thought. Thank you.
Yeah, a governing power. Yeah.
In a way, there is a metaphor for that rhythm comment that Mrs. Singletary made. One reads that the top, like basketball players or football players or whatever players, that the game comes to them slower, or somehow in more control, which is exactly what they can get from that comment, that when one is with God, and everything is very smooth and, again, in rhythm.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Like anything in life, when it's in sync with God, it takes on a rhythm of its own.
It's the peace we can feel even when things are rough. If you're in God, then there's a sense of peace, a deeper sense of peace still.
Yeah, thank you. That challenge is to remain in that rhythm when everything else seems to be out of rhythm. And that's your connection, your oneness with the Father. Not to get thrown off kilter by what's going on around you. That was a great quote, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those great explanations. The topic is Genesis 1, the only creation. And the Bible readings were Genesis 1, 1 through 19. And the first question, God is infinite. How can there be a beginning?
Well, Mrs. Eddy said the infinite has no beginning. The word beginning is employed to signify the only, that is, the eternal verity and unity of God and man, including the universe.
Another possible way of looking at it is in the beginning of our own understanding of God and the universe.
I also took it to mean primal. In other words, the first or primal nature of all creation is God good. Therefore, its nature is good, if seen in its true light.
Yeah, and we can't really appreciate Genesis 1 except in science, can we? Because the idea that there might be a beginning, or that there might be another creation, I mean, those are the things that science just really annihilates.
That's why Mrs. Eddy says this mind, the symbol is the sphere, because it has no beginning and no end.
Yeah, she also said that Genesis and Revelation were her two favorite books in the Bible because they required greater inspiration to understand them.
Yeah, this is something, it's a very deep topic, but something to think about so you incorporate it more in your own life. Because if you think you started, then you're going to think you're going to end too. And that's how everyone thinks that. You have a beginning and an end. And that's why in science we are careful about when we celebrate birthdays, for instance. I mean, we learned here that we are to know this was the day God put us on this earth to fulfill his will. But be careful of these, well, they're material in a way, celebrations, all of them, passing of time, because there is no time. We live in the eternal present. And thinking there is time is what causes us to rush, again, to get out of this rhythm of God. So no, right now is all that you have, this very moment. In the first edition, in her chapter on creation, Mrs. Eddy says, Spirit is without beginning and without end. Contemplate life as it is, neither man nor matter, but God, which is intelligence, purity, and harmony, and we gain happiness. If life has a starting point, immortality is a myth. Commencing at a given point signifies a terminus. If life has a beginning, it has an end also, and there is no immortality. Life is spherical, without beginning or end. The form of the globe typifies it, and the principle of the universe is life, truth, and love. So if you haven't already, you know for yourself and for everyone, your children, family members, friends, everyone, you've had no beginning and you will have no end. the only, and work to get a deeper understanding of what this means, because as I said, this is a very deep topic. She says here, if you do it, you will find happiness. The belief of mortality that makes us all miserable. Anyone else? How about Linda?
Well, it really made me think because I about the word begin, and I actually looked it up in the 1828, and it said to have to original, a first existence, and it just gave me a better sense that this is all there ever was. I mean, I had such a limited sense of beginning. I sort of thought about it like in school, when somebody's in front of the line or the end of the line, there's a beginning or end. But this here is just as the original. And so I was really grateful to have time to think about what does this really mean.
Thank you.
I thought Barnes said something interesting about this. So Barnes writes, creation is not confined to a single point of time. He goes on and he talks about creation. Creation is like something that is sort of ongoing, but it's not as I said, a point in time, sense that there's time, but something that always exists, so that creation is always ongoing.
Yeah, and Mrs. Eddy states that somewhere, doesn't she? That creation is ever appearing.
And from its inexhaustible source. I used to wonder, well, when I had this thing, there's no matter. So if there's no matter, well, and then if there's, I don't know, I ended up thinking we would be like the Shakers. There wouldn't be any more children or babies but that's not true. Not according to what Mrs. Eddy said. I had to dig deeper into it. It's a constant unfolding of ideas, and that's what children are. They're an unfoldment of ideas, and they're complete now. What does she say? They're mature, undecaying. We all are. We are all this unfolding of ideas, and there's no end to it.
To back up what Linda read, I took Strong's Concordance and I looked up the word beginning from the translation of the Hebrew, and what it said was first in place, time, rank, first fruit. What I liked the best was principal thing. And then
The principal thing.
and a very important point for hopefully people listening and not being aware of this is that in Genesis 1, it's God, which is Elohim, Supreme God, and Mrs. Eddy said dual nature, plurality of nature, which allows for Father, Mother God. And then in Genesis 2, it turns into Lord God, which is Jehovah, which is a tribal deity.
Yeah, I think interesting, going back to what you said about the Hebrew word for beginning and what it meant. When I read that, it really, really seemed very much like what Mary Baker Eddy wrote, which I thought was just wonderful. I mean, because she talked about in terms of the only, and this gives a sense of the only. Because part of the definitions is chief, the sort of supreme of everything. Again, not like a sense of time.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's pretty awesome. Think that all of creation here is contained in, one chapter of Genesis. How do you succinctly describe God and His creation? I mean, it really can't be done humanly. It's like we're scratching the surface here of the immensity of what God is and what God creates. Oh,
Go ahead, Tom.
yeah.
Oh, so just going on about this word, I was one of you brought this up. I did read that this is not a common word that's used in the Bible. So it sort of gives you a sense that, okay, it was translated into the beginning for us to read, but the word that they used seems like it was very carefully picked.
Well, one other place it was used was in John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was anything made that was made. And also in the first edition, Mrs. Eddy says, in Him was life, etc. And then to conclude in the face of this infinite logic, that an egg is the starting point of life, that seed produces germination, etc., is to forget this is mythical and a belief that usurped the prerogative of understanding, starting an atom from dust, calling itself life and matter, and resulting in mortality, the very opposite of truth. So it's always very important, really, to understand this beginning. I know is fairly read in the beginning, at the beginning, that it's the only from Science and Health. Anyone else with this?
A little bit, actually.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask Jeremy, tell them again what you found about matter and antimatter, in case anyone didn't get it.
Okay, yeah, let's see, the facility called CERN, I think it's in Switzerland. It's a particle accelerator. They've been studying protons there and antiprotons, and there was always the idea that they were somehow different, and that difference helped to create the universe. And then they found that through all their testing, they really couldn't determine a difference. And so they came to the conclusion that the universe shouldn't exist. It was money and time well spent.
Well, and what it's saying is the material universe shouldn't exist, and it doesn't exist.
Well, didn't you say, Jeremy, that one of their conclusions was that there's an equal amount of matter and antimatter?
Yeah, one wasn't really destroying the other. They thought it was that instability and asymmetry in the numbers that would explain the universe.
Right. The thought they were looking for atomic force. They were looking for a creative element in atoms itself, and they couldn't find it.
Which is good to know. I mean, somewhere else in Mrs. Eddy's writing, she talks about mind spake and form appeared. And she knew it was all mind. That's what God is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the primal nature of everything.
Mm-hmm.
The expression of mind.
Well, and That's what nuclear physicists or quantum physicists are discovering as they explore more and more what matter is made of. They're finding that matter is not matter, that it's forces, and that their explanation of why things happen the way they happen is becoming more metaphysical than physical.
Yeah, that's so exciting, and it's certainly what Einstein came upon. And Mrs. Eddy says if you take any of these topics and you take them far enough, you will come to divine science, because that's all there is. It's only when you stop in the middle, you don't get the real truth with a capital T. You take it all the way, you'll come to divine science, because as I said, that is all there is, and it is the truth.
That's why Einstein was so impressed with the textbook after he read it. And he explained to people, you have no idea what's in this book.
Yeah, so make it your daily companion. Study, to listen to just absorb these truths. We've only begun to scratch the surface of this truth.
When I look at beyond that in that first verse, there isn't much else other than harmony and earth. Heaven and earth. And Mrs. Eddy calls heaven harmony. And I've always wondered what the significance of earth, because I keep thinking of matter, earth. But then just recently, and I wrote it down, but now I can't find where I wrote it down. I found where she said that earth represents understanding. And it's really fascinating because in Genesis 1, you only have earth and land. And when you look at the Hebrew translation, they're both the same and the same word. But then when you get to Genesis 2, all of a sudden the mist went up from the ground, and ground is completely different than earth. And that happens to come from the word Adam. So I thought that was quite fascinating.
That is, and in the glossary, her definition is a sphere. This is a definition of earth. A sphere, a type of eternity and immortality, which are likewise without beginning or end. The material sense, earth is matter. The spiritual sense, it is a compound idea. That's beautiful. Thanks for bringing that up, Mike.
Oh, thank you for illuminating on that. That's great. That is wonderful.
Yeah, because I would have thought Earth, too, would have dealt with materiality, but this is a beautiful definition of it. And it's not material, those who have eyes to see.
And that's why it's essential that we see things in their true light, that we see the earth as its spiritual reality, that we see our homes in their true light, that we see one another in their true light.
This goes to the next question. What is the light? Go ahead, Mike.
You said it. What is the light of Genesis 1:3?
Okay, how about Suzanne?
I don't know. I thought light could be the truth that shines.
Yes. Thank you, Suzanne. And how does the light reach us? Truth, like the light, just is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's already here.
all around.
It's all around.
And we have
It's
this
not
thing,
dependent on anything.
we all have this thing called spiritual sense. When we hear something true, well, it just naturally rings true, and we recognize it as such. And therefore, the truth reaches us.
What does Mrs. Eddy say about this passage?
Immortal and divine mind presents the idea of God, first in light, second in reflection, third in spiritual and immortal forms of beauty and goodness. But this mind creates no element nor a symbol of discord and decay. God creates neither erring thought, mortal life, mutable truth, nor variable love.
What a great definition. And the little next to it says mind's idea faultless in the margin.
I love this question because it helped me think more deeply about the lesson, which the Bible selection ends with, "Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light." And I realized, really, the Genesis 1 is about being awake, and it's light, and there's no real darkness or sleepiness or apathy. It was very interesting to me, the person who wrote this lesson, the way they tied in this sense of light and being awake and active. And I really am grateful for that.
Yes, one definition in the 1828 dictionary, there's many for light, is life, illumination of mind, understanding, and wisdom. I just love that.
Thank you. That is it. And tell them, Linda, tell them about the trip you took.
I went for a drive in our local area to see the pretty trees changing in fall, and we ended up in an area that was very wealthy and very exclusive. They had, their wonderful little restaurants and stores, and everything was pretty, and their bike paths. And normally I would have loved that and been attracted to that, and I thought it would be peaceful and a place to live. But this time I felt a real heaviness come over, like a false sense of peace and sleep. And it was very strange. And when we drove out of there, where the world was more active and awake, and it was like a shock to me that this false sense of peace is what we need to avoid. And it felt very ungodly to me. There was like this false sense of security and with no God in it. And it really alerted me to the importance of being awake. I used to be very drawn to this, wanting this sense of peace and comfort, but it's a false sense. It's wanting it in matter. And it puts you to sleep to what you need to be alert to. And so it was a very good lesson, and I really appreciate having this Bible lesson right on the tail of it that's talking about being awake. And God gives us light. And you need the Bible, and you need to be biblical. And it's a very active piece.
Thank you. This is what should be happening as you're growing in the science. You can travel if you do, but you should be you get more and more sensitive to your surroundings. And even though this was beautiful, sometimes, what is it, beautiful?
What does she say about
always
matter?
Erroneous?
Sometimes beautiful, always
erroneous.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what you were feeling, Linda. The erroneousness.
And that's a good thing, because in that way, you're awake and alert to it, and you handle it. Otherwise, you fall into it, or you begin to feel depressed or something, and you think it's your thinking. But when you're awake in the truth, this is how it works. So she was aware of it, and because she was aware of it, it didn't overcome her or take her over in any way, either to where she thought it was something desirous or whether it put her to sleep or perhaps even made her depressed. It can do a lot of things because what that is, what she was driving through was the human mind. And it might have looked lovely, but nonetheless, it was human. It lacked God. So,
Yes.
Thank you.
When Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you." I've been thinking about the concept of peace and what Jesus meant by that and how important the right sense of peace is. That's interesting what Linda shared.
Yeah, because really, what is the right sense of peace?
Not being comfortable with evil and error. And you can't, if you're falling asleep, you're not going to see it. It's subtlety.
Or not making deals with error, negotiating with error. The world's sense of peace is, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The world sense of peace is peace where there is no peace.
Yeah, I mean, peace is having the dominion over all these false beliefs, isn't it? Having exercised your dominion and felt the dominion, and then you feel the peace that none of these things move me. The peace that comes when you are at home with God.
So Christ follows it up by saying, "Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Addressing fear.
Yeah, and the only way you handle fear, as was brought out, is knowing who created it all and who governs it all. It's only when we get in the Adam dream and have a personal sense of who and what we are that suddenly we are fearful, we're ashamed, we're prideful. All of those negative emotions come into play. Jealous.
And also envy.
Envy.
Right. Which is what the second chapter of Genesis is all about, isn't it? Adam and Eve and their children. They went through the whole charade.
Yeah. So the light is God-given. It's the spiritual sense, your understanding of the truth. It brings light, and you know what you feel, light. Everything is illumined. And again, in first edition, she says, the sun is figurative of soul, of the principle of man and the universe, of the life and intelligence outside of matter, and governs the entire creation. Stars represent scintillations of truth that appear in the twilight of understanding or darkness of belief. Matter never represented God. Geology cannot explain the earth, nor one of its formations, for these formations are dependent alone on spirit that gave them forth the eternal heavens, earth, and man. Intelligence formed and peopled the universe. The scripture gives no record of solar light until after time had been divided into day and night and vegetation was formed, showing you light was the symbol of the life-giving creator and not a source of life to the vegetable kingdom. All are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul. You know, we can't live without light, can we? Light's essential. for life. In figuratively both ways, we need light. And it's God-given to all His creation. Let there be light.
We can discuss this verse for a long, long time. I know many times it's been very helpful to me because I hear these words, let there be light, and I take it like God making a command, and it's followed with, there was a light. And in other words, it definitely happened. I think it...
Yeah, what was that Mallory and Isaiah love so much?
Yes, this is what Mallory and Isaiah love so much. They love to hear the fact that the Bible said, that God said, let there be light. And they just attracted to it. They wanted to hear it each time.
Yeah, these are his little grandchildren. He had to read that story to them over and over again.
Yeah. They just appealed to their simple purity.
Yes, yeah.
And I was going to say, for me, it's been very helpful because I think it's a treatment for almost anything. You know how it is day to day? You need to know which step to take, which way to go. Well, let there be light, and there was light. It's the nature of mind and truth that the right way is known. Mind does manifest itself in understanding. So we do know that, so therefore it's no excuse for not knowing.
Thank you.
And how is it that we receive this light? Can we borrow it from somebody else?
Mrs. Eddy says that he illumines one's way when one is obedient. So to me, it was obedience.
Yeah, it comes to us through inspiration, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't come to us through a book or going to school or anything like that. The right books have good words that help us, lead us, but we get it directly through inspiration.
And that leads to something else I had marked in miscellaneous writings, Mrs. Eddy's article, Fidelity. And she's talking about the parable of the 10 virgins. We learn from this parable that neither the cares of this world nor the so-called pleasures or pains of material sense are adequate to plead for the neglect of spiritual light that must be tended to keep aglow the flame of devotion, whereby to enter into the joy of divine demonstration. The foolish virgins had no oil in their lamps. Their way was material. Thus they were in doubt and darkness. They heeded not the sloth, their fading warmth of action. Hence, the steady decline of spiritual light. Until the midnight gloom upon them, they must borrow the better tended lamps of the faithful. By entering the guest chamber of truth and beholding the bridal of life and love, they would be wedded to a higher understanding of God. Each moment's fair expectancy was to behold the bridegroom, the one altogether lovely. It's a very important chapter to be familiar with. But you see, God gives us this light. But how do we lose it?
Neglecting
Neglecting it.
Mm-hmm.
If Linda had driven into that area and been so, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful and I love it, oh my goodness, I'd love to live like this, she would come home depressed or
worse.
Or worse. But because she was spiritually awake to it and using her spiritual sense, she was not impressed. And she came home wiser. So when you have it, you cultivate it and use it and let it grow. Don't be a foolish virgin, for heaven's sake. you're losing your spiritual light. And that is never a good thing. So remember this. And don't let this God-given light wane or become depleted. We've talked about in other Bible studies, there's always a falling away first before something happens untoward. And that's when you let your spiritual light get depleted. You're not grateful for it, you're not aware of it, you don't cultivate it. We have no greater gift than this. Your spiritual sense, your understanding. You will develop it if you use it, and it will grow more and more into the brighter day, the Bible says. So value it above all other things. It is the pearl of great price.
I don't remember. Oh.
Go ahead. Who?
I was.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, I don't remember where it is, but it reminds me of we're like a pane of glass that we want to keep clean so that the light can shine through. I don't remember where that was.
That was Mrs. Evans would tell us that, but it was probably, who knows, maybe Mrs. Eddy or someone else.
Oh.
The origin of it.
I kind of like that. To keep our glass clean so that the light can shine through in that.
Right, the light. That's it, the light. Yes. Who else was trying to speak?
Yeah, I was going to say, but on that subject, Mrs. Eddy definitely said that we have to clean that pane of glass and keep it clean. But what I was going to say was that I did, again, look in Strong's Concordance, and what it said about light was, and again, you have to go by where it's in the Bible, because this was in Genesis 1. It's luminary in every sense, as one who enlightens mankind. Then it also said light and happiness, but when I came to the word happiness, I took it to mean how the word joy is always used here at Plainfield, that kind of happiness, the joy of God.
Yes, thank you. And light, you do feel, people sometimes will mention after a week of rain or something, you're just so happy to see the sun and the light. It does bring joy. I mean, both, every type of light is symbolic of God. And brightness, joy, happiness.
Then one thing from Blue Book, Mrs. Eddy has the definition of 5 spiritual senses, and I always think of light is connected with sight, so her definition of sight is spiritual discernment, which is exactly what Gary had been discussing.
Thank you. That's a very important point. Always, I mean, you think of it, and you look at the Bible, what Jesus talks about, the eye and everything, always goes back to light. So.
And it's all spiritual.
Yes.
There is no other reality. I mean, this is this is a real discipline to cultivate your spiritual understanding.
You don't see with your eyeball. What do you see with?
Spiritual sight. Mind.
Yes. Your spiritual sense. Yes.
Discernment. It's God. All-seeing. That's the definition of God in the glossary. All-seeing. You see because God sees. And yeah, it is, as Gary said, a discipline. You work with that during the day. What are you seeing? Are you seeing with the eyes of God? Are you beholding His creation?
And are you not making a god of anything else? is quite a discipline.
Yeah, Mrs. Eddy says that, if you see what God sees, you'll never have any trouble with your eyesight.
And I think one thing that helps with the discipline is, we've been talking about all of this on a grand scale, and indeed it is very grand. But it is also applicable on little individual items that happen to us throughout the day. And I think that's, for me anyway, it's very helpful with the discipline. That there be God, light, and there was light for each individual little decision that I have to make. And,
well, that's the practical aspect of it. There isn't anything in your life that is too big or too small. Turn to God for the answer.
And sometimes when you can't, if you're with God, it opens your understanding. Where someone is doing something, that you don't like or don't feel comfortable with, you have this understanding if you're staying with God. And sometimes, understanding is very important in helping and dealing with other people.
So true.
That's right. That's why we're here.
Yeah, no, but you will see the need. You will understand why a person did something rather than quickly condemn or judge them.
Yeah.
It's a great. It's because God knows all things. So.
And as we go through each day and situations come to us, whether they be problems or questions or whatever, God has the right answer. And we can get the right answer from him. That's what's so beautiful about all this.
And, in that 1 Timothy 1:7 that I referred to on Wednesday night, God has not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And that sound mind includes a disciplined mind. That is what God has given you. You see, when you think you don't have these things and you say you don't have these things, you are inadvertently shutting them out. Say you do have, say you are disciplined. Tell yourself you are because that's what God gave you. Tell yourself you're loving because that's what God gave you. Tell yourself you have power from on high because that's what God gives you. But declare it for yourself. So you are disciplined. You can be disciplined in this truth. It's God-given. It's your divine right. The thing is, you never claim it. And you argue against it and say you're not.
And the fact that you don't feel it at a particular time doesn't mean you shouldn't declare it.
Absolutely. That means you declare it all the louder.
Is that the same thing as taking possession or seizing dominion of what,
yes.
God, has given us? Because I sometimes get a little confused on what taking possession of. I remember that little booklet by Adam Dickey, Take Possession. I used to get that at the reading room. I never understood what it meant. Dominion and possession, they kind of confuse it.
Well, what is it that you're supposed to take possession of? What does he say in the article?
Of what God has given us, the eyes to see through his eyes. I be general about it.
Yeah, you take possession of your divine right as God's creation to have what God gives you, which is all good. Anything unlike God, you don't need, and you can do away with by taking possession of good only. This is the discipline.
I think we also have to take possession of the path that God puts in front of us. Nobody's going to swoop in and do it for us. we got to do it. So.
Yeah, you take responsibility for your own life, for your own actions. You learn from your own mistakes. That's taking possession. You can't blame others.
But in taking this possession, in order to obtain these things, it requires obedience. You can't go around and, lead any kind of a life, immoral or otherwise, and then just say, oh, I'm going to take possession of joy and health and prosperity or whatever else. No. You take possession as you live and obey. It's a byproduct of it.
Yeah, because when you disobey God, you're taking possession of something unreal.
And you put yourself in the Adam dream.
And it can only harm yourself in belief when you do that.
But that's a good question, Jeff.
I think it also means, like, if we are told in the Bible so many times, be not afraid, we have to use that truth. It's using it. It's the taking possession as well.
What's that phrase? Use it or lose it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, it can't ever be lost, can it? You might lose sight of it. But as soon as your heart turns to God, it's right there, because there is nothing else in reality.
Like the recent roundtable, it's never too late.
That's right, absolutely.
Exactly.
Never too late. So whether you're coming on these truths early or late, it doesn't matter. Never too late. And remember, you have eternity to work it all out. So.
So no, that doesn't mean dilly-dally now, but.
Yeah, it doesn't mean dilly-dally, but.
But it also means don't ever give up on yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I think Edward Kimball said, "Don't take 50 or 60 years to figure this out."
We don't want to wander around in the wilderness, children of Israel, complaining and whining. Okay, do we have a better understanding of light?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, then. Shall we move on to number 3? What is the firmament?
Evan?
One of the things with spiritual understanding, the understanding, and then understanding is the line of demarcation between the real and the unreal.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I love this concept of firmament because it gives me something practical to work with. You know, I have the ability to distinguish the real from the unreal, the true from the false. Something smells right or just smells wrong, and I have the ability to tell which is which. And that's a very important thing to have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like to think of it that way, that God has given us the ability to discern right from wrong. To have spiritual understanding. It is our safety, isn't it?
Again, from Strong's, firmament is a visible arch of the sky. It's the limit of what we can see. So that's the separating between the real and the unreal. And Mrs. Eddy in the 6th edition writes, instead of the line of demarcation, the way she printed it then was, understanding forms the line of demonstration whereby to determine the real from the unreal. I just so love that, because when one can truly demonstrate, which I couldn't in the past, I didn't know what was right and I didn't know what was wrong. And here at Plainfield, learning all these wonderful hints and ways of practicing, just like we had here just a couple minutes ago. Now I can, and now I can demonstrate, now that I know what the line of demarcation really is.
That's wonderful.
It was also like Linda driving through that town that looked like it was so beautiful, but feeling like it really wasn't. And,
The understanding,
mm-hmm.
her spiritual sense.
And it's something that is available to all of us, isn't it? This spiritual sense, this ability to discern spiritually. So it's not a mystical thing that some people have or some people don't have. This is a God-given ability.
It's just a matter, as in, that's why the story of the Virgin, who cultivates it, who appreciates it, or who doesn't. And if you don't give a hoot about it, well, then okay, but don't complain. as did these virgins complain when the midnight hour came. Again, in first edition, first Mrs. Eddy quotes Genesis, and God called the firmament heaven. That is harmony, even the result of understanding. The first day in spirit is when he whom to know aright is life eternal, i.e. life, love, and truth bring forth their idea. The second day is to perceive, and the third to understand this idea, heaven, earth, and man. So you see, when you obtain this understanding, when the light comes and you obtain the understanding, spiritual sense, which you cultivate and love and work with every day, then a harmony comes. And the harmony is actually heaven. That's what it means, heaven on earth. As in heaven, so on earth, the Lord's Prayer. Are you experiencing this heaven? If not, what more? Ask God, what more can you do? Because it is right here, right now. You're not separated from it. It's a matter of seeing, beholding the light.
And if you're not experiencing this heaven, ask God to give thee comfort. Ask God to give thee light. It's there. And He's a loving Father, Mother, God. He's not going to deprive you of it.
And then affirm you do have it, because you do. And Arrow would always like to make you think you don't, and it's like a dog chasing its tail. You're just always chasing your tail, thinking you'll never get it. You have it. See it. Declare for yourself. That goes back, that's what Jeff was saying about possessing it. Declare for yourself this truth. It's true about you now. And nothing can close your eyes to this fact, supreme truth about all of God's creation, no one excluded.
And this gets to a really wicked false belief that is unfortunately prevalent, and that is this belief that you don't deserve this because you are a wicked sinner. Therefore, you have to go to some priest or some other person in order to be hope to be saved. And maybe you will, and maybe you won't. All of that nonsense has to be put to rest. And if it's ever been a part of any of you that are relatively new to science, don't give it house room. Kick it out. God never said it. God has only good for you, and you have every ability to possess that good.
Anyone else on firmament? Anyone else who didn't speak that has something, anything they'd like to say?
There was a quote from Herbert Eustace in our last January Liberator. He quoted, he said, "You are the light of the world. You are that light. The understanding that you have the allness of mind is the light, and that is the light of the world."
Beautiful. What appropriate ending. Thank you, Dale. We have one more question, and we will get to it maybe at the round table tomorrow.
What time is it?
The clock struck 11. Is it not 11?
Oh.
11. It's 11. That was a lovely quote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Great discussion.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.